I can settle you, Brian.
Is that what you're calling yourself these days? And so is that what you're calling yourself these days?
Yes. What's
The time is 5:30 p.m. on Monday, January 8th, our very first work session of 2024. So happy New Year. And I'd like to welcome all of our new counselors to their very first work session. How exciting and welcome. We're going to first start with city updates. So Ms. Solano, please take it away.
Thank you, Madam Chair, City Council, Mayor Gradisar. I have a few updates this evening. Happy New Year and welcome to new councilors as well. First of all, I wanted to let the council know and a reminder that Mr. Gil Romero will be attending every city council meeting beginning next week with an extended work session next week that will go through a tutorial on how to utilize the bill tracker that their firm will be using throughout the legislative season. So he will be here. We will likely postpone the ARPA presentation and update for 1 week so that he has adequate time for the tutorial and the training. The second update is just information that the mayor has declared a weather emergency for a warming shelter. It will open nightly beginning this evening at 7 and every night and through Saturday night this week because of the cold temperatures. And so the warming shelter is expecting to be open, and the information has gone out to the continuum of care folks as well and on the website. The next update that I have, and Clyde does not have a flyer to pull up, but it will be on the city's website and on social media, is an invitation. Next Monday is Martin Luther King Day of Service. The NAACP, along with the city of Pueblo, are sponsoring a cleanup event, one of the Team Up to Cleanups. Volunteers are needed and all are encouraged to participate. And it will be held at the El Pueblo Museum Courtyard, meeting time 1:45 p.m. The next flyer that we'll see on social media and on the city's website has to do with a trail closure. For safety of visitors and construction workers, access to the Arkansas River near the Waterworks Park project is now restricted. Construction on the $11 million project is underway below City Park and east of Pueblo Boulevard. The map I have here, we can't pull up for you tonight, though, will be on the city website and social media. It is closed for safety. Foot and cycle traffic are allowed only on the trail to the north of the Arkansas River between Pueblo Boulevard and the Wild Horse Creek pedestrian bridge. Access to the trail on the south side of the river is temporarily closed between City Park and the Wild Horse Creek Bridge. The next update that I have has long been awaited for this. Public Works Director, Mr. Hayes has shared with me today to ask to share with you. I'm going to read this so I get it correctly. Demolition of the fire damaged building known as the Albany, located at 125 East 7th Street, is scheduled to begin cleanup during the week of January 22nd. Demolition work activities are expected to take approximately 45 days. A number of risk mitigation to ensure public health and safety during the project will be implemented, including partial road closures on East 7th Street and Albany Street. Vehicle, bicycle, and pedestrian traffic impacts will occur on those roads throughout the duration of that project. Interested persons with additional questions are invited to contact the Public Works Department, 719-553-2295, or by email at publicworks@pueblo.us. And we'll turn that into a flyer and be able to share that at next week's city council meeting, as well as put it on the website and a press release on closures as we have more specifics. The ARPA presentation for the current 2024 balance and plans going into the new year will likely be postponed. Next Monday, I'll also have additional information on updates for City Council. The retail strategies presentation, I'm asking for the $150,000 for a 2-year period. The purchasing department has reviewed our options, and I wanted to be able to share those with you. You should have them electronically this week. And the request for funding for the CyberCube School, he's asked, Mr. Maddock is asked to return with the new council to make the presentation again, which was scheduled for, I think, the 22nd. And that concludes city updates this evening. Do you have any directions or questions for me?
Thank you, Ms. Solano, for all of those updates. Questions from council? Um, I know that the ARPA update will be postponed after Mr. Romero comes, but I know I did see some back and forth regarding Rocky Mountain Stairs ask. Do you have an update with that?
Yes, we did schedule a meeting. I asked them if they would come in and bring their invoices directly with our city finance director. And she is out through one more day. They're coming in on Wednesday afternoon. So we should have that finalized before at the end of Wednesday.
Okay. And then speaking of about the levy, I know that several quarters ago, council put out to vote to the community the different murals for the levy. And I was walking my dog earlier and I actually noticed that it's nearly done. Do we have an update from the artist on when it's going to be fully done or any updates regarding that?
I only have an update, Madam Chair, with respect to payment. So when we get to the resolutions this evening and council contingency, which we'll go back over again, and when Q1 comes on the council agenda, is when it will be finished is expected relatively soon. And so payment will happen in 2024 rather than 2023. But I don't have an estimated time of her total completion other than soon.
Great. Councilor Flores?
I think I'd sent you an email, might have been yesterday, about an update on the cyber school request. And I don't remember, was that under the ARPA umbrella or was that a separate item that would have to be looked at under our general fund? I couldn't remember.
Councilor Flores, when I talked to Mr. Maddock, Kurt Maddock, who was presenting, he asked the council, he introduced the opportunity and the request for funding of $300,000. We had not looked at that time at whether it qualified for ARPA or not. He has requested to represent with a new council, and I think we've scheduled that for the 22nd. That'll give maybe the city attorney an opportunity from the last presentation to review whether it met with compliance for ARPA funds.
Thank you.
Other questions or direction for Ms. Solano? Seeing none, thank you, Ms. Solano, for that update. We're going to move along on our agenda and hear about an election update from Ms. Stoller.
Good evening, Chair Martinez, members of City Council. So the few of you who are on council still will find this very familiar, but we're going to talk really quickly just about some basic information about the election and then some updates of some of the issues that we're being seen, just so everyone knows how to address them. So there are a couple things that we wanted to make clear about this election. So firstly, this election is different than any of the other elections that we have had going from the past perhaps 20 years, just because this is the first one that the city is actually running ourselves. In the past, there have been city-only elections, but they were still run by the county. But this is the first in many years that the city has done. And obviously in the past 20 years, there have been many changes to how we vote in Colorado as well. So I just wanted to remind everyone of that. So there are no in-person voting machines for this election. It is a mail ballot election only, which means that the only way to vote is via your mail ballot. So if anyone does need assistance in that regard, because they would normally come in and vote on a voting machine, all of the staff at the city clerk's office are certified as election judges and would be able to assist if needed. Otherwise, there's the witness line on the ballots, which allow people to have assistance in voting and then signing afterward. Any issues that people do come to find with their ballots, people are able to come to the city clerk's office and we can help them fix those issues. I'll go into some of the more common issues that we're seeing in just a minute here. If you are not registered to vote yet and would like to be registered to vote, obviously all of our council members are registered to vote since that is a requirement of running for council. But you would be able to go online or register at the county clerk's office. But the address to go online to register to vote is govotecolorado.org or .gov, excuse me, govotecolorado.gov. And then if you wait a day, the county will put you on the list and will be able to you'll be able to pick up your ballot the following day. We will make arrangements for same-day voter registration so that anyone that does want to vote on January 23rd is still able to come to our office and register. The process may just take a little bit longer because the county will have to be proactively checking that list and updating it for us. So anyone that can register ahead of time and get a ballot ahead of time, we do appreciate that, as we do expect to be very busy on election day. Another thing that you can do via that same web address, govotecolorado.gov, is to update any of your voter registration. So if you need to update your address or your party affiliation or your name or anything like that, that can be updated there. And the other thing that I want to make clear is that mail ballots have to be received by the city clerk's office by 7 p.m. on election day. So that's the city clerk's office, not the post office. So mailing your ballot on election day will not sufficiently ensure that your ballot will be there on time. So if it's getting, to that weekend before and people haven't dropped their ballots, we definitely recommend that they choose a drop box instead of mailing it. And then of course, don't forget too, you also need a stamp for that. One first class forever stamp will do it. So some of the ballot issues that we've been hearing about from people calling into our office are as follows. One, we're hearing about some duplicate ballots, and this is actually a pretty simple fix. If you do end up getting 2 ballots, you can pick one to vote. Please do only pick one. And then you would tear up the duplicate and throw that one away. You can also turn it into the clerk's office for shredding if you'd prefer for the second ballot. And if anyone did end up voting both ballots, it would be caught during the check-in ballot process. So it's a normal routine thing that does seem to happen. We did talk to the Pueblo County Clerk's office, and they've seen it in their elections as well. So we're not overly concerned because any duplicate voting would be caught during that check-in process. A deceased individual receiving a ballot. So this is something obviously that would be fixed more for the future and not for the city's election at this point. And so that would be, we would direct people to go to the county clerk's office with a death certificate to update that voter registration list, and they would be able to process it there. The city clerk's list the voter roll is supplied entirely by the county, so we're not able to update that list for anything long-term. And then finally, missing ballot. We have had a number of people say that they haven't gotten their ballots yet. Sometimes it's because it just hasn't arrived yet. We're kind of asking people to wait until January 10th to determine if it has in fact not actually arrived. But in any case, they can request another one, and in several ways. They can call us on the phone, and we'll take either their email address or an address to confirm and mail to. Or basically there's a form that needs to be filled out to request this, and they can come and fill it out in our office. That process takes maybe about 5 to 10 minutes, and then they can take their ballot right there and vote it right there if they'd like to. 24-hour Dropbox locations. So you'll notice that there is one addition to this list. I spoke with the county clerk on Friday, and she let us know that her office was being overwhelmed with voters walking into her office and telling her that the Dropbox was locked in front of the elections office. And that was because, we've been trying to deal with our manpower problem by only having a select number open. And we had chosen the county courthouse because they said that that one was more frequently visited and more frequently used. But she did tell us that the county had done a lot of marketing since then about the availability of the new Dropbox location because they had moved their elections office. And so they asked if we would consider opening it to kind of help lessen the voter confusion around that one being locked and to alleviate the strain on their office. So since that Dropbox is so close to the county courthouse Dropbox, we determined that that was one that could be unlocked as well, and it wouldn't significantly add to the election judge pickup route because we do need those election judges who are going around picking up those ballots to be back into the counting room to aid with the counting of the ballots as much as possible. But we did also want to make sure that the voter confusion over that box being locked was not going to be problematic. So those are the updates I have. I would just encourage everyone to vote and also to vote early so that we can have the returns back as soon as possible. I'm happy to answer any questions that council may have.
Thank you, Ms. Stoller, for those updates regarding the election. Councilor Aliff.
Thank you. I've gotten a few phone calls of people who've never seen this affidavit of voter on there. So people seem to do things the same way that they've done it over the last 10, 12 years, and they just sign their ballot. If they just sign their ballot and don't fill out the affidavit, does their vote count?
My understanding of the affidavit is that we put it in there because there was a concern with the differences between the election code that the city had and the election code that the state had. And those, this was submitted to the printer before council had the opportunity to vote on updating those rules. And council did vote in the end to change to match to the state. So that affidavit is no longer a concern in my opinion, but I would also if any of the if there was an issue with it, we would send out a notice similar to a signature verification issue where the voter would then have the opportunity to cure.
Okay, so even though their signature matches and their name and address is on the ballot, there's a chance they'd have to go.
I don't believe
this
so,
again.
but I would 100%, I don't want to give you a 100% answer. There would be the opportunity to cure it if it was an issue. I don't believe it's going to be an issue.
Other questions? Counselor Maestri?
Do you happen to have an overseas deadline that's later than the?
Yes, the state statute does say that the overseas voters have an additional, I believe, 8 days to get their ballots back in, since they can only mail in. And that is an expected count that we do. We actually end up keeping out a few ballots so that we can mix as Ucava that may come back after election day to put in the final count. And that's part of the reason too why any results that we do are unofficial until after the canvass.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions from Ms. Stoller? Seeing none, thank you, Ms. Stoller, for that update. And then we're going to move along on our agenda. The last two presentations are regarding upcoming ordinances on first reading for today is first reading. So the first one is regarding the amending Pueblo Municipal Code regulating commercial vehicle operations. And I believe it's Mr. Hippolyte presenting for this.
Good evening, members of council. I'll wait for the presentation to get pulled up. There we go. Good evening, members of council. This presentation is specifically designed to facilitate a conversation about the ordinance and its text so everyone can understand what the text says and what its practical effects are. There are not many slides here in the presentation. There's only one. First, I sort of want to level set and go through some basic terminology that I think is helpful in discussing this particular ordinance. There are three sort of terms that are used sometimes interchangeably, but shouldn't. But just so everyone's aware, the first basic term is an interstate carrier. And what that means is a motor carrier or like a charter bus company or a Greyhound bus company that transports people across state lines and is registered with the Federal Motor Carriers Safety Administration. The other is an intrastate carrier, and that's a motor carrier who's registered with the state to provide transportation and related services within the jurisdictional limits of the state. So federal motor carrier, they provide transportation from one state to another. An intrastate motor carrier, they provide transportation within the state of Colorado. The other is typically both intra and interstate carriers are defined under Colorado statutes as common carriers. And a common carrier is just a person who provides a means of transportation or related services in a vehicle that indiscriminately carries passengers for compensation. Very simple definition. If you pick up people in a bus and you transport them from one place to another, you're a common carrier in the state of Colorado. In general, the ordinance, there is a balance between federal, state, and local law. The Federal Motor Carriers Administration and Safety Administration and Safety Act, it specifically allows the federal law to preempt any state or local law in areas that regulate intrastate carriers. So interstate carriers, no one else can regulate them but the federal government. So therefore, Colorado has a sort of separate statutory scheme that only regulates intrastate carriers, and it's administered by the PUC. The PUC sets what I would call high-level policy, and the state patrol sets rules. As a result, while I think I sort of want to be clear and sort of jump ahead of this conversation, the city, from a municipal perspective, does not have the authority to conflict with the state or the federal regulations for any kind of carrier. The best the city can do is make a violation of what the state's rules are for safety, inspection, insurance, routes, all the services, all of those things, to make a violation of the state's rules, a violation of the city's municipal code. But it can't conflict in any way, come to any kind of different conclusion, or provide any different scheme. So specifically speaking about the regulation we have in front of us that's being proposed, what it would do is it would make a violation of the state scheme a violation of the local municipal code. What that would mean is, to the extent that a intrastate motor carrier violated any of the state's rules, its rules for safety, insurance, operational standards, rates, routes, services, and or how it enters into the market, to the extent that it was investigated by a city officer could then issue a ticket. That ticket would then be processed through municipal court. And per this specific ordinance, that money, any money that was collected from that, would then be applied to provide road, right-of-way, or other transportation improvements. And with that, I'll pause for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hippolyte. Counselor Maestri, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, the reason I brought this ordinance forward is because we hear so often from our constituency that people are dropping, buses are dropping off people in City Park and places that are undesignated stops by the local Colorado PUC and those guidelines. What it does, it is allows for, now there's a controversy. Some people say it happens, some people say it doesn't happen. But what it does is it allows for a citizen to see if someone is dropping off a busload of people in the park where it's not a designated stop, they can call the police department, and the police department has the right to come out and investigate the situation. And decide to ticket it or not. And so that's what it allows to do. Too many people say that we don't do anything or act on anything. And this is one way that we can enforce buses that are coming into town and dropping people off in unregulated stops. Because obviously, we hear of these places that are kind of off out of the way. They're not necessarily at the bus stop stations and the bus stop areas. So what it does is it allows for PD to receive that call and go out to make sure that that is in fact happening. And so the citizens have asked us to do something about people coming here and buses coming here and dropping off people, and that's what we're doing. We're making an effort to make sure that, we're investigating that. But right now, you can call the police department and they're not authorized to do anything. This ordinance would authorize them. Am I right, Mr.?
So currently, the way the regulatory scheme works, if something like that happened, the police would have to refer that call to the Colorado State Patrol. And to the extent that the Colorado State Patrol decided to come out and investigate, they could take action, but the police wouldn't be able to directly themselves, for example, write a ticket and send the person to state court.
But we can log it into the system.
Yes, you could. You would definitely log the call into the system. That's
this
about all
way,
you can do.
Like I said, the constituencies are always saying that we don't do anything. Right now, this is about the best that we can do, if it's happening. And I'm not to argue whether it's happening or not happening, but we do have a lot of complaints from constituency. And so here's an opportunity to try to do something about it.
What other, Counselor Flores?
To clarify this, if a buses chartered to drop people off, homeless people or whatever, the ticket goes to the carrier then. It doesn't stop the dropping off, I guess, of the individuals.
So the way the state regulations work is the ticket can go to the person physically driving the vehicle.
Mhm.
It can also go to the carrier as well. Our municipal code is set up to process violations against either or both.
And if you run what's called a public transit service, like the one that goes to Cripple Creek, they have on file as to where they could stop. They just if they're low on gas and it's not on the manifest, they can get a ticket for stopping for gas. Or
So specifically the PUC, they have to register the routes that they take or do not take. Its destination, so it's starting its destination with the PUC and get those routes approved before they can start providing services. So to the extent that, for example, their route service does not end in City Park, it ends at the city bus depot and they drop off in an alternative location, assuming, right, that could be, I'm gonna take a half a step back and talk about all the assumptions I'm making, right? I'm assuming that there is evidence that has happened. There's evidence that they're dropping off, that they're at that location, and the police can be deployed and collect that evidence. Then yes, they would be able to be prosecuted.
okay, I didn't realize that it was even a problem here. To be honest with you, there's so many rumors that goes around constantly about this thing or that thing, but I may have heard this once before, but I don't think there's any proof that it actually happened. But
The only other thing I will mention is, again, because this is an all or nothing scheme, the city will also get the benefit of tagging along or tagging on to any other operational or safety issues that occur with common carriers within the city's limits. So it just wouldn't be limited to you dropping off at the wrong route. For example, if you're operating a vehicle in a common carrier in an unsafe manner, if you don't have the appropriate insurance requirements, any of those violations would also be a violation of municipal code, and the city can enforce those as well.
Other questions for Mr. Hippolyte? How much is the fine right now?
It's just a general municipal fine. So because it's a criminal violation, they'd be subject to up to a 364 days in jail and $1,000 fine per violation.
Okay. And would this also, so I know that Uber sometimes go from one state to another. Would this also, like the smaller carriers, does that also apply to them?
So Uber wouldn't qualify as a common carrier or even a federal motor carrier. So Uber qualifies as what's called a TNC. It's a totally different set of regulations, and they have a totally different set of standards. So this wouldn't catch them.
Okay. Other Counselor Gomez?
Is there any other places this has been tried or any proof of the pudding that we can, instead of reinventing the wheel, has this actually been tried other places?
Yes, so I did model this off of a different community. I modeled this particular ordinance off a different community up north. I don't have any statistics as to how many tickets they write or issue. What I can tell you is that this is the constitutional balance, so we aren't preempted by federal law. So this particular draft of the ordinance would be enforceable. I think the thing that, from a legal perspective, to realize is we're in a narrow what's called legal preemption world. So too far one way, and the PUC standards will encapsulate us, and our municipal ordinance will be unenforceable. Too far in another way, the federal standards would encapsulate us, and our municipal standard would be enforceable. And this is sort of walking down that middle line. I mean, this is all predicated on the city having enough traffic officers to be able to go out and investigate. So I don't want to get everyone's hopes up and think the city likely is going to be able to go out and write these tickets all the time. This is just really in a situation where the city gets a report, the local officer would have the authority to go out, investigate, and issue a ticket to the extent that they can collect the appropriate evidence.
Do we have, Counselor Gomez, sorry, are you done?
No, I'm good.
Do we have data right now of how many, given that the current schematic is that CSPD knows, the State Patrol investigates, how many tickets or how many investigations in Pueblo City does Colorado State Patrol have related to commercial vehicle violations?
I'm not aware of any.
Other questions?
Well, because you would.
Counselor Maestri?
Yes, well, because you wouldn't know, it wouldn't be reported to you, so you wouldn't be aware of any.
That is fair. We wouldn't know, but in this situation, I did make a phone call to a friend and
Mhm.
check, and I'm not aware of any open or active investigations within the city of Pueblo last year in 2023 about motor carrier standards.
Mhm.
Would it be possible, Mr. Hippolyte, to get that data pulled over a 5-year span?
I certainly can ask. I don't know if they'll give it to me, but I certainly can ask.
I'd be curious to know how many investigations the state patrol is doing here locally.
Typically, the way the state patrol does investigate this is they catch common carriers on the interstate highways. Because state patrol, right, is a limited resource organization, and they have to cover a large geographic area. So to the extent you see weigh stations on I-25 or I-70 or any of our interstates, and you see a patrol officer who is over by the weigh station, that's typically where they check for these standards.
Okay. Other questions regarding this topic? If not, we're going to move on to the next topic, which is around limiting camping on public property. And I believe it's Mr. Hippolyte again.
So again, this is the presentation is quite short. It really just presents the text to facilitate the conversation and get any questions answered by council. Excuse me, this ordinance specifically would amend the city's code to outlaw two things. First, a person camping on city property without express written permission. There is an exception to enforcement of the ordinance, and that is specifically where the city does not have any open shelter beds for that night. From a constitutional perspective, the Colorado State Supreme Court has come out with a decision that says you essentially cannot criminalize being homeless. So to the extent that there are no available beds for a person to sleep, you cannot enforce anti-camping bans. So this ordinance specifically provides for that as an exception. So to the extent that there are not available homeless beds, the police would not be able to enforce this anti-camping ban. To the extent that there are available shelter beds, in this situation, if a person were to refuse taking one of those shelter beds, that's considered a per se violation or a violation in fact without any more or additional evidence. The other part of this ordinance is it would prevent the erection of what I will call temporary structures on city property without the express written permission. There is no exception to that ban. That simply just prevents the erection of a tent or a net or some kind of temporary structure a person could live in on city property without express permission, or on city property and or other public property without express permission. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
I wish that you would have increased the font size on these slides.
I'm sorry, it's a lot of words. It's a lot of words to squeeze into a slide. I sincerely apologize. I can go through it though, if that's helpful, each line by line, if that would be more helpful.
Do we need line by line?
I got glasses. I'm good.
Okay. What questions for Mr. Hippolyte? Counselor Graham?
Mr. Hippolyte, I thought that there was there's a fine attached. Is that right? Is that correct?
Yes, it's the same municipal fine. That's actually on the next slide. I apologize.
Okay. And it's $1,000, 364 days.
It'd be the same general municipal fine up to $1,000 and up to 364 days in jail.
And then my other question is, how is the police department to know if we have enough beds? Has there been a thought process for that?
So the Pueblo shelters give the police a readout every night of how many available shelter beds we have.
So this would be like a day to day,
Yes.
whether they could enforce the rules or not.
Yes. But it's my understanding we have not had a shortage of beds in the last year.
Okay. And then I think maybe this question is for Counselor Maestri. I agree that people shouldn't necessarily be able to camp on public property, but the $1,000 fine is what gets me. I just don't know how somebody like this would be able to pay the $1,000 fine. And so I get where you're coming from. I'm just trying to, I'm trying to see what would,
how we would go about cleaning up the problem, because I don't necessarily think that they could pay the, I mean, is there after a certain amount of times that they're picked up or a certain amount of tickets, something more happens? I didn't find that in the ordinance, but I was gonna ask you tonight if you had a
Well,
better idea.
You know, like you said, even when the SOS crew comes out and they offer help and they're refusing help, basically that's what you're getting here when you have someone that's refusing to take a shelter bed and continue building a camp site and basically polluting our public lands. We have a responsibility as leaders in this community to keep our public lands clean. That's one of our things. I've been noticing on the news and so forth, a lot of the larger cities with encampments are getting, having public health issues. There are diseases going around through the camps, through the water sources. We have the Fountain Creek. There are many, and so, you know, we have to be good stewards of our public lands. And so I'm not even going to address what some people might think that this is something against the homeless. It's about protecting our public lands. And so they have the opportunity to either take a bed at the shelter or pay the fine. Maybe they think they can pay the fine. Maybe they think they can afford to pay the fine. But whether we lessen the fine, whether it's that impactful or not, because a lot of these, the people that are living out there receive some sort of subsidy. And so if they choose to pay the fine, if they don't like the laws and ordinances of our city, maybe they won't choose to live here. I've been watching these ordinances enforced up in Denver. Actually not Denver, but Boulder and Douglas County. And they seem to be working. I don't know about you, but when I drive through both of those areas, they're way cleaner than we are down here and in some of the other areas throughout the state that don't have a ban like this. And so a lot of the cities within the state of Colorado are entertaining them or implementing them into as an ordinance into their community. And as you can see, we are suffering heavily from trash, from human waste, from all different sorts of things out there in the environment that are really affecting our environment. And at what point is enough enough? I mean, because the Fountain Creek, if the EPA gets a hold of the Fountain Creek, I'm amazed they haven't done anything yet with all of the stuff and the waste that goes down the Fountain Creek. I mean, after all, we won a $52 million lawsuit against Springs for polluting. And so at some point, is someone down the line going to win a suit for, you know, the pollution that comes from the encampments along the Fountain Creek and pollutes their area, their waters and for their areas?
I just don't think it's realistic for $1,000 fine, but I agree with everything else you're saying. I'd like to see like community service or something else as part of the punishment, and maybe not the dollar amount of $1,000.
So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt
fine.
you, but we're most likely probably not going to be working with anybody that's going to want to do community service either. They're just going to be flippant about it and not do anything, because we can't even hire homeless people now to come in and clean up their own mess. We can't even pay them to clean up their own mess. So sometimes the deterrent, we can't, you know, I mean, we could choose to try to make it easier, but I'm telling you that this follows from other communities within the state. I didn't just make this fine up.
Did they end up paying the fine, or they end up getting picked up for contempt of court, or
I'm sure
what usually
I'm
happens?
I'm sure it's a mix of all. And I don't know if Mr. Hippolyte
Mr.
has
Hippolyte's
data on that.
been wanting to speak for a while.
No, I just want to clarify. So to your question, Counselor Graham, specifically, the city council doesn't say the exact fine or punishment that is available for any particular violation. of the ordinances in city council. It either sets a floor or sets a window. So here, the maximum fine for any violation would be $1,000. The maximum stay of incarceration would be 364 days. Our municipal judge would have the authority to determine inside of that range based upon a whole bunch of factors, what the particular violator, what kind of punishment was deserved in that particular context. And that's typically the way it works. What city council could do is set a minimum fine, but it typically doesn't do the other way because the city's code already has a maximum. And so these just cite to the maximum, but the judge is able to order anything under the maximum.
Other questions? Counselor Latino, I think.
I have something that I'd like to say. I've done some research as it relates to homelessness. I was raised on Goat Hill. You know where that is? And Smelter. And so I spent a lot of time in that area and down on the river. In fact, one day I saw the fire marshal when I was working out, and they go down there to make sure that they're not drowning in the Fountain Creek. That's not my major point. I've spent some time visiting with the Homeless Innovations Officer, Maria Subia, in Albuquerque. And they're doing some things in other cities, folks, that we really need to take a handle on. They're putting these people to work. They're taking them off the street and they're putting them to work. And I've talked to a number of homeless people myself over the course of the last 4 or 5 months, because I jog and work out and do those kinds of things. And a number of them have said to me, I'd be willing to work, sir. I'd be willing to work. So we take them off the street, we put them on a bus, and we put them to work cleaning up weeds and trash and doing those kinds of things, and they're willing to do that. But we have to be creative and we have to be assertive as a community, folks. We have a problem here. We have a real problem. They're sleeping on the street. They're sleeping in front of buildings. They're camping out in front of offices and restaurants and commercial places, and people are afraid to do what it is they need to do. Go to the north side, Walmart. Got to have some character, folks. Got to have some como se llamas, strength. Okay. So we need to be moving forward and coming up with a proposal for these folks. As it's also my understanding that in other states are putting in the newspaper, go to Pueblo, Colorado. You'll have a place to sleep, get whatever you need. That's not Pueblo. That's not the Pueblo I was raised in. Coming down Union or Main Street after going to practice, whether it was football, basketball, or baseball, where I went to high school at 5 or 6 o'clock at night, my parents not worrying about me getting home. So we have to have some character here, and we have to have some strength, and we have to say no. And we have to say these are the rules and the regulations as it relates to Pueblo, Colorado. Thank you.
I'm going to go to Counselor Gomez and then Counselor Flores.
First, I want to applaud Councilwoman Maestri for bringing this forward. I'm concerned about the other mechanisms when you're dealing with, this is a law enforcement issue here. And I am concerned that when they go out to this and they have to have the interaction, what happens if they run into somebody who has a tent or has a place that they're saying is trying to stay out of the cold, and they refuse to go to a warming shelter? What is that? Do they take the tent away? Do they put them in a position where they might freeze outside? We're looking at future lawsuits. I don't know how this plays out. It's very, very complicated. But the fact that we're trying to address it, I applaud you for that. But if somebody can address that in reference to law enforcement, I'd like to hear it.
So in general, with any municipal code violation, the police would issue a ticket to the person. The ticket would issue a summons. The person would have to appear in municipal court, and they would have an opportunity to present evidence. My office would prosecute the ticket, and depending upon what the judge decided, then an action would be taken. If they were guilty, fine would be levied, and theoretically, state of incarceration, depending upon the circumstances, could also be levied. And that's essentially what would happen.
What level of misdemeanor is this? Our jail is a felony jail. You can't take them to jail.
So our municipal offenses, our municipal offenses are all misdemeanors. So even the highest level of our municipal offense is always a misdemeanor. So we only live in the misdemeanor world in our municipal code. So this would not be a felony. Although they could be sentenced to county jail for that period of time, which is less than less than 364 days, depending upon ultimately what the municipal court judge decides.
Other questions or comments? Counselor Flores, I'm sorry, you said that I would go to you next.
I have heard that we have anywhere from 600 to 800 homeless people in Pueblo. That number always seems to fluctuate in that area. And I don't think we have more than maybe 125 beds. And I'm talking about the rescue mission. And I know we have the warming shelter, and that's not considered a bed. But if you can make the assumption that there's always going to be tents out there where we're not going to be able to house all of the homeless because we don't have 600 to 800 beds. How do you expect the police to manage this? I mean, are they going to be able to go directly to the tent because it's visible from Interstate 25 or Fountain Creek? And are they going to be doing a sweep of this, or how is this going to work? I mean, it's an interesting.
So I want to be very clear, sweeps are illegal, so the police will not be doing
Okay.
sweeps. The other part of this is like any other violation, right? To the extent a police officer on their regular duty spots a violation of municipal code, it's authorized to enforce it. To the extent that there is a complaint that comes in, he or she is authorized to enforce it. So that's typically how, just like any other municipal code violation, if you say someone broke into my car, right, you get that call in, dispatch sends the police there. If they're out on their beat and they see something, they can also enforce there. I mean, our law enforcement officers always have prosecutorial discretion. So they decide while in the particular situation or circumstance, how to enforce and best enforce the laws to keep people safe. In this particular situation, I wouldn't imagine that it'd be any different. I don't want to speak for the chief, but I think the chief wouldn't, be in favor of doing sweeps or anything like that. I think this is a situation where, to the extent that there, for example, would be a business owner who would call and say, I have a person camping. You check how many shelter beds available, assuming that there are available shelter beds, the cops can be dispatched and can enforce this ordinance.
Sorry, Counselor Aliff, did you have anything? Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm confused on the enforcement part of it. Because it's a municipal offense, they can't force them to take their tent down. They can just write a ticket, correct? So that the structure or the tent would remain in place and they would go through the process of our court system, the municipal court system, because they would be issued a ticket, correct?
So,
because I didn't see in the ordinance where there's any meat to it where you have police officers or community service officers literally going to an illegal camp and saying, this needs to be taken down now and here's a ticket or whatever. So I don't understand that part of it.
So to the extent that a person is on private property and doesn't have, for example, the
Well,
authority
this
to
is city
I know.
property.
I want to give the broader picture, and then I'll zoom in on the city property. To the extent that person's on private property doing something and they're called and we're told by the private property owner, they don't want that there, that can be removed. So city property would be no different, right? To the extent that a person does not have written permission to keep their tent there, to the extent that the city wants to remove the tent after the person has been issued the municipal code violation, they could remove the tent after the person's been issued the municipal code violation. Typically, you don't put those kinds of things in ordinances because that power already exists anyway, because the city has full control of its property.
So they could say, you have to move.
Yes, they could say you have to move, but it would take another city official besides, for example, the police officer to make that call, who's ever responsible for maintaining that city property. So for example, if you're in a public park and you are camped, someone calls and makes a complaint, the police show up, they issue a ticket. And then if the parks director said, I did not give this person written permission to have this tent or the structure here, then the tent can be moved.
Got it. So my concern would be on enforcement. I mean, literally, the city now has rules, ordinances that allow, I'll just give you an example. I went to the bank the other day and I went down Main Street and there was literally during the middle of the day, 5 people sleeping on Main Street, right on the main drag. So we have ordinances in place that allow us as a community, and the police are enforced to go down there and enforce our non-loitering laws and such, and it just doesn't happen. So the people can sleep in front of businesses on the sidewalk, so on and so forth, because there's nobody doing anything about it or that I can tell. So even if we pass this ordinance in a couple weeks or whenever it happens, my big concern is that you're going to have another law on the books and nobody's going to do anything about it. It's just going to be another law on the books. I can remember getting calls from constituents. I called the police. Nobody's come over. There's nothing that's been done. The people are sleeping out here. What can we do? So that's very concerning. But I think as a community, literally the way that we allow people to live in those areas is inhumane. It's insanity, the way that those camps are, or those tent places are set up, and the literal filth and feces and so on and so forth that just litter those places, that not only is it not safe for the community, but it's not safe for the people that are living there. And as a community, we can't just continue. If you drive from the Evraz, if you're coming down I-25 by Evraz there in Councilor Gomez's district, and you look over to your right across from the railroad track, it's the most disgusting thing I've ever seen. And it's been that way for a year and a half. And nobody does anything about it. But yet it's just something needs to be done, and there has to be teeth behind ordinances, and we have to give our community the power to at least take action on certain things that are just not right and just taking place in our community. But we also need enforcement of these ordinances when they're passed, and that would be my concern on the whole thing. But something has to be done.
Mr. Hippolyte.
The only thing I would say, Councilor Aylip, is that currently right now, some of the behavior you're describing would not be a violation of our municipal code. So the police officers, unless they were called by a private property owner, would not have the ability to take enforcement action.
Well, I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. If I'm coming up Highway 50 bypass and we have non-panhandling signs in the middle of the intersection there, and I'm in the turn lane and there's 3 people panhandling and there's a policeman in front of me, where the sign is, he should be able to say, you can't be on this median. We have a law in place, an ordinance in place within the city that you can't do that. So you're saying that he doesn't have a right to do that?
No, I was specifically talking about the camping in the tents. So I was specifically talking about the camping in the tents. Right now, currently as it stands, it is not a general. Yeah.
Okay, I get you. So I was arguing for nothing.
Mayor.
I want to make it clear, everybody should understand that with or without this ordinance, it is illegal to camp in parks.
Yes, currently the city does have an ordinance that makes it unlawful to camp in a park without the direct permission of the parks director, or to erect a structure in a park without the permission of the parks director. It does not apply to general city and or public property all throughout the rest of the city. That's the distinction that I was trying to make.
I have several questions. You know, when the city has before looked at ordinances around addressing homelessness, we've been really cautioned by our legal counsel because it could put us in a position to get sued by the ACLU, given that we're really targeting homelessness and criminalizing homelessness. Would this put us in that similar position?
So I can only give you my legal opinion. What I can tell you is this ordinance is modeled off of Denver's and Jeffco's, and both of those have stood up to judicial scrutiny. So I can't tell you for sure that this, you can sue a ham sandwich. Anybody can sue about anything. What I can tell you is, particularly in this situation, I've modeled these off of ordinances that have been judicially tested and passed that scrutiny. So to the best of my sort of legal opinion, I can tell you, I believe this one would stand up against judicial scrutiny.
And I know that in the ordinance, it reads that if there's space available for homeless individuals, then they would be, moved there. I guess my concern is while the rescue mission does a great job at serving individuals experiencing homelessness, there's still some barriers there, like people who have pets. They can't go there. There's nowhere right now in the city limits for people who have pets and are homeless. For couples, there's no place in the city limits that are okay with people who are couples staying together. So I think that I'm genuinely concerned about that those populations of homeless who can't be served, even though there's space at the rescue mission, because of, and maybe also they're on their list because they've been kicked out before. We've heard about that several months ago. So I am genuinely concerned about that population.
So what I would say is the ordinance was written with that particular exemption, but to the extent that council believes an additional exemption or more exemptions should be available for different types to address different types of population or those situations, again, the ordinance can be changed, tweaked by a motion or amendment to include those additional exemptions or exceptions to the general rule. I don't really have an opinion about any of them particularly. What I would say is the one exemption that the courts, especially in Colorado, have looked for to ensure that the law is constitutional or in accordance with Colorado law is to make sure that enforcement of the ordinance is tied to available shelter beds. To the extent that it's tied to available shelter beds, the courts have said that ordinance is lawful because in that situation, you're not particularly criminalizing homelessness because the person has an alternative of a place to go. To the extent that you remove that kind of exemption, that's when courts have disallowed camping or anti-camping bans.
Councilor Maestri, I know that you were working on this ordinance. Did you consult the city's Commission on Housing and Homelessness at all?
No, I didn't. I only brought
It's-
it to Mr. Hippolyte.
It seems like a huge missed opportunity, given that the city has a Commission on Housing and Homelessness who does know the best practices, who has a whole bunch of members who are invested in addressing homelessness and housing, that they were not consulted. And I'd be curious to know what the city's own commission has regarding these two ordinances.
It's my understanding that city staff, these have been provided to city staff for them to provide comments. And again, we haven't quite gotten to the point where we've even passed on first reading or had a public hearing, but I'll let Chief Solano.
Ms. Solano?
Councilor Martinez, our new city facilitator for the Commission on Housing and Homelessness did indeed send an email out with the copies of the ordinances and the opportunities to address city council and submit concerns as a collective body, but also encouraging their individual comments. And because it was a work session tonight, she did the appropriate thing in advance, also offering a special meeting if that was necessary, because their next scheduled meeting will not occur prior to city council's vote if this moves forward. And so our facilitator is in the audience this evening, our city employee, but she also did communicate directly to all commission members today.
Given that they have worked hard on a strategic plan to address housing and homelessness, I would love to hear what the commission has to say about these two specific topics. Other questions? Mayor, did you have anything?
Well, no, I was just going to say, if council so desires, we could postpone the ordinance until it's presented to the Commission on Housing and Homelessness and get a recommendation or thoughts from them. I mean, if whatever the pleasure of the council is if that's how you want to handle it, we can certainly do that.
Councilor Maestri?
Yes, thank you. A couple of things. The Commission of Housing and Homelessness has not come to us with anything since I've been on council for 2 years, offering any suggestions on what they should do with homelessness. That's that's not true. How many times? Okay. And I didn't bring this to tackle the homeless issue. I brought this forward to protect our public lands and our environment and health and safety for this community. If that involves homeless people having encampments that are polluting our environment, that's not what I'm not addressing that. What I'm trying to address here is to keep our environment clean. That is our responsibility as leadership. And so that's what I'm holding to. Secondly, I know that there's a concern about enforcement. There's a concern about enforcement with all ordinances that we put forward. Quite a few ordinances that we have put forward, and there has been a lack of enforcement. It is our job here on council to implement ordinances as we see fit. It is this is the legislative branch. That's what we do. The administrative branch enforces ordinances. If they're not enforcing ordinances, I'm not going to stop implementing ordinances. In fact, we probably need to address how the first and foremost duty of the administrative power is to enforce the ordinances, and they're not being enforced. There's got to be something that we as a community need to start addressing, either change leadership or, you know, I don't know that. I'm glad that we are starting with a new council and new things, and I enjoy the position of Mr. Hippolyte and his enlightenment of a lot of things that weren't explained to us when we first with our previous council, and we're actually becoming a little bit more empowered on the know of our position. And so housing and homelessness has not come to us about this issue in particular. And I guess until I brought something up, now they feel the need to come in front of us. But however you want to do that, Councilor Martinez, if you'd like to bring the homeless and housing commission in and put that in front of everyone, but I brought it forward because I'm tired of seeing the pollution in our town and what the damage it's doing to our property, it's doing to private citizens' property. It's our responsibility to take care of that also. Thank you.
Councilor Latino, did you have anything?
Yes. I'm going to share a story with you about the homelessness as it relates to Goat Hill and the 4th Street Bridge, where there's an overhang. And me taking a walk there not too many months ago with the current city county commissioner. And there was a couch, there was a coffee table, and about 4 or 5 feet away, there was a 10-foot or 10-gallon disposal for feces. That's where we are, folks. That's where we are. Now, we can be Pueblo, Colorado, home of heroes. And by the way, I worked in Santa Fe, New Mexico. That's where I went to college and knew Jerry Murphy, and I knew what kind of man he was, and he was on the city council. Okay. So we either have to stand fast and hard and firm and be Pueblo, Colorado, home of heroes, or we can be Pueblo, Colorado, just let anybody come and do whatever you want. I'm not going to sit here for 4 years and allow that to happen. And I'm hoping the rest of us will work, and we need to listen to Mr. Hippolyte. And I'm sorry, George. I'm just fired up about this. And we need to do something, folks, instead of just sitting around and talking about it. So let's move forward and get some things done and be a strong city, the home of heroes.
Any other final questions regarding this topic? Councilor Gomez?
Well, I don't want to make this more complicated, but this is really concerning me. I'm laser focused on my District 4. And I don't want to discuss this too late tonight, but I'm concerned that a lot of the homeless, if they're going to try to stay warm and they need to get drug needles, they need to get drug cookers, whatever it's going to take in this needle exchange program, they're coming to my district. And if we were out there like they were, we'd be trying to find the closest location to pitch a tent when it's cold weather, so you can go get this needle exchange done in the morning or whatever it takes. So they're going to stay overnight in that district. You're going to see, I'm afraid, blue tent, Tarp City, all over that iconic business area. And it's, you know, all those businesses. So this has really got me concerned more now than ever. Maybe this is not the time we settle it, but I want to make sure you understand. I think it's coming our way, and I'm really very, very concerned about it.
Other questions or comments? Seeing none, then that concludes the work session. We will have the regular meeting starting at 7 p.m. where we are going to induct our very new council members.